Hello and welcome to the summer edition of The Report, Cal State Fullerton's premier source for news, views, and info. I'm Evan Boydston.
I'm Sarah Fenton.
I'm Jeffrey Witten.
I'm Cassidy Jo Fortin.
And I'm Eric Resendiz.
On today's special episode of The Report, we will be discussing the Senate's vote against 4 gun control laws after the Orlando nightclub shooting, as well as an in-depth update on our country's current state of politics.
Also, we have an update on current climate change legislation, news on a recent study on homeless students in the CSU system, and an update on the status of water quality in Flint, Michigan.
All this and more on our exclusive summer episode of The Report.
Omar Mateen opened fire at Pulse, a gay nightclub in Orlando, killing 49 patrons as well as injuring 53 others in the deadliest mass shooting in American history. Garnering significant media coverage, this event overshadowed a number of attacks around the country, including 42 other shootings that happened the same day, which left 18 dead and 41 injured. The significance shows how prevalent gun violence is across the United States, which has led to outrage amongst many Americans. According to CNN, after the Orlando shooting, support for tougher gun laws rose to 55% in the newest poll, the highest number since just 1 month after the shootings in Newtown, Connecticut in January 2013. But support for specific gun control measures is very strong, with 92% saying they want expanded background checks, 87% supporting a ban for felons or people with mental health problems, and 85% saying they would ban people on the federal watch list from buying guns. Among Republicans, that number is even higher, with 90% who say they favor preventing people on the terror watch list or no-fly list from buying a gun. That number is at 85% for Democrats. With Americans clearly looking for more gun reform, why is Congress not evenly representing the public?
This is really the most frustrating for me right now because in Congress you have 2 factions. You have one faction that really wants change and to make progress for the country, and then the other faction doesn't even want to stand at the table and to have like an actual debate or anything. Because they're basically acting like stubborn babies. They're babies that are bought out by the NRA. There's thousands of dollars every year getting Republicans into office, paid for by the NRA. And basically almost every year I looked on lobbying disclosures on Congress's website, and about $45,000 every year goes right into the RNC, Republican National Committee. So
it's crazy how money has such a big role in our government and how it shouldn't have that much control over the decisions that are being made. You have now what is a corrupt government because the NRA is paying off half of the people in Congress to get these gun laws to stay the same and not pass new ones to make it safer. And now you have mass shootings, an epidemic of mass shootings that happen constantly, at least one a week. And people are dying because people are being paid out in Congress. It's insane.
And if that doesn't change, how do we expect change on mass shootings to stop? We need to get to the grain of the problem. And if Republicans, they're the ones that are stopping, not saying yes to at least to have a try and have a debate.
So during the Democratic filibuster a couple weeks ago, Alan Lowenthal had a few things to say about the Orlando shootings relating having gun control over guns, as well as tying it to as a hate crime on the LGBT community. Let's take a look at that clip.
49 dead Americans. Sons, daughters, husbands, wives, friends. Whatever his ideology, whatever gun he used, this killer was driven by hate towards the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community. Just as hate struck the LGBT community at the Upstairs Lounge in New Orleans, or at Uncle Charlie's in New York City, or at the B-Bar nightclub here in Washington, or the hundreds and hundreds of other attacks that occur each year, it is because of the inaction of bodies like this, the Congress of the United States, to address discrimination, to ignore cries for equality, that this hate continues to fester. The LGBT community deals with this fear and hate every single day, all for wanting to live and love and be who they are. And who they are, just like every member of the LGBT community, is sons, daughters, husbands, wives, and friends. Thank you, and I yield back.
President George Bush Sr. actually banned the importation of 43 foreign-made manufactured firearms, but the administration actually acknowledged that the slack would be easily taken up by domestic manufacturers. So then during that time, Italy's Beretta actually built a factory in the United States so they can sell their weapons without having the tariff imposed on them. So I think no matter what, the Republicans still want the guns to be here because it's big business regardless, but they're being bought out by all the lobbyists right now, and it's just absolutely ridiculous.
Well, I think my big thing, even beyond gun control, later we'll have a story on climate change, but basically the Republicans are obstructing Congress from doing anything, any decisions getting made. It's just not happening.
Since our last episode, the race to the White House has intensified and become extremely polar. Bernie Sanders has dropped out of the race, allowing Hillary Clinton to become the Democratic Party nominee. However, Bernie Sanders has pledged to defeat Donald Trump and has vowed to work with Clinton in doing so, but has yet to endorse the nominee. Meanwhile, the Republican nominee Donald Trump has recently fired his campaign manager Corey Lewandowski, which some speculate is because recent polls have shown Trump falling to Clinton. According to CNN, a new Quinnipiac University poll shows Hillary Clinton leading Trump by just 2 points, 42% to 40%, a much closer race than other recent surveys have shown. With third-party candidates included, Clinton leads 39% to 37%, with Libertarian Party nominee Gary Johnson at 8% and Green Party candidate Jill Stein at 4%. Johnson has appeared on multiple news outlets and has gained traction as a possible third-party candidate in the wake of this unique election, as well as Jill Stein as people weigh their options. How do recent current events like Brexit and the Ataturk airport terrorist attack have an effect on our presidential election? Is there a real possibility of having a third-party fringe candidate as our president? Whichever party denomination is chosen, will the next president be able to unify our country?
I think one thing that doesn't exactly answer the questions posed, but is important nonetheless, is I think it's interesting that Bernie Sanders is holding off on his nomination, and I'm pretty sure it's because he wants the DNC to unify a platform that he agrees with, and I think that is a great thing.
As we've seen in this extremely unique election, there's a lot of problems. There's a lot of polar opposites in this country right now. I think that's why a lot of people are looking to those fringe candidates like Gary Johnson. He's gaining a lot of traction. I've seen him on multiple news outlets and also a lot of Tonight shows and stuff like that. And he's a funny guy. He's another one of those characters that have been coming out for this election. So we'll see where that goes.
And to the question in regards to like the Brexit, and also the Ataturk airport attack, along with other attacks, it does affect, like where our candidates stand and like the propositions that they're doing, because I feel like the U.S. has used a lot of other countries as examples, of what not to do. And I think that's why we have been striving and have been so successful and where we are. So that does contribute.
I think the main thing it affects is our foreign policy going into the future, because we have close ties and have for a long time with the UK. So I think that will be one of the big effects.
Yeah, and like Trump was quick to praise the United Kingdom for Britain for the Brexit, and it's also interesting for like the Ataturk terrorist attack. Every single time there's a terrorist attack, Trump always says, "Oh, it's I told you guys, I told you so." So he always has voters flock to him, and I think that helps him in the polls in regards to that. And for something like Brexit, it parallels a lot of what his rhetoric is, because a lot of it was for the immigration policy.
Yeah, he uses it as a sort of playground for his racist comments to really take effect.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think he's actually kind of taking like some type of. He was in the country before 3 days or 2 days before Brexit, the voting happened. And so once it happened, he's kind of taking oh, hey, I was there and I was speaking about this and I had something to do with it. And so I think now has even bigger head than what he had before, because he's all happy because he wasn't nearby.
Yeah, we're all interested in hearing not just what the candidates think about issues that are going on within our own country, but a lot about what's going on outside of the country. And like you say, they are using it, what they say in their views, to gain more traction. And in this case, it is helping Trump's favor, unfortunately.
I also feel that they're using like the power of the media just to help them, become more noticeable, get more attention, because those terrorist attacks have been going on for a long time. It's just that the media was banged that they weren't covering these other terrorist attacks, besides Paris, besides what happened in here in her home. They were bashed for that, and now they're doing more of the, smaller countries, smaller cities. They're recognizing that. So I feel like since we're paying more attention to that, we're airing it more. That is why people like Donald Trump are just saying, yes, I told you so, I told you so. So he's just using the cards in his game.
Unfortunately, we have to move on. Cal State Fullerton faculty were among thousands of scientists as part of an international LIGO scientific collaboration. Gravitational waves were discovered for the first time, undulations in the fabric of the cosmos arriving on Earth from the collision of two black holes millions of light years away. Our very own CSUF faculty have a few things to say in honor of this collective discovery. Let's take a look.
The LIGO Consortium made the very first ever direct observation of gravitational waves predicted by Einstein's theory of relativity 100 years ago. And we're very proud of the fact that scientists and students here at Cal State Fullerton have played a key leading role in this discovery.
Gravitational waves are ripples in space-time that travel at the speed of light. They stretch and squeeze distances in space-time, and LIGO makes the most sensitive measurement of length differences ever. LIGO observes gravitational waves using lasers to measure tiny fractional changes in the distances between mirrors that are separated by 2.5 miles or 4 kilometers. This is the first direct detection of gravitational waves, a fundamental prediction of Einstein's theory of relativity from a century ago. And it is the first observation of two black holes that started as separate objects and merged to form one final black hole.
A recent study found that up to 12% of CSU students lack regular access to food, and up to 24% are living in unstable housing conditions. The chancellor has challenged each campus to assist in the mitigation of homelessness and food insecurity of students. ASI Executive Director Dave Edwards is a co-chair of the 27-member task force created to thoroughly examine the issues on our campus. They plan to conduct their own assessment this fall and develop a targeted plan for the university. Edwards states, quote, "We want to build a really strong, sustainable program for our students that has funding, facilities, and campus-wide support behind it," end quote.
The current stagnation of climate change reform in the United States is not representative of vast quantities of science in support of the human-made climate change effects on Earth. In fact, the exact opposite is true. Our current extremely obstructionist Congress has tried to pass 9 joint resolutions just within the span of 3 months in the year of 2015 to reject current EPA regulations of greenhouse gases, specifically carbon dioxide. Furthermore, Congress attempted to pass 2 joint resolutions that would effectively nullify administration of regulations by the Environmental Protection Agency until countries such as China, India, and Russia pass or agree on some form of international climate change legislation. But according to climate scientists of varying backgrounds, the United States needs to set an example for all other countries to follow suit. Now, the European Union already has cap and trade of greenhouse gases in effect, but in cases the informed public does not agree with the lack of intensity. The citizens of Denmark won a lawsuit against their country, mandating that they regulate emissions to 25% of 1990 levels by 2020. The rest of the EU only has to meet a goal of 15% by 2020, a goal set forth in 2005. California's AB 32, the only cap and trade in effect in the U.S., is a starting point for other states to regulate the same standards set forth in the EU.
In a decision that surprised many, the UK has voted to leave the European Union in a 52 to 48% vote. The next day, the 2 most Googled searches were, quote, "What does it mean to leave the EU?" and "What is the EU?" end quote. However, for the UK to leave the EU, it has to invoke an agreement called Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty. According to BBC legal correspondent Clive Coleman, the article has only been in force since late 2009 and it hasn't been tested yet, so no one really knows how the Brexit process will work. From the aftermath of Brexit, David Cameron, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, announced he will be stepping down. The UK's credit rating has been cut, and a new petition has already gathered more than 1 million signatures calling for another vote. During the campaign leading up to the referendum, the Leave supporters focused heavily on immigration. They argued that free movement in the EU meant Britain loses control of its borders. EU membership allowed for citizens from the other 27 countries to move to Britain and look for work without a concrete job offer. Leave supporters accuse immigrants from struggling Eastern European states who were willing to work for lower wages for their argument in leaving the EU.
As of October 2015, in the latest water quality report for Flint, Michigan, the levels of lead are exceeding the acceptable amounts in 8% of samples. Former Mayor Dane Walling switched the city's water supply from Detroit to its own system, where the main water supply was the Flint River, on April 25, 2014. According to the former mayor, the change happened without making the necessary adjustments in adding a carbon filter that would have protected the water supply from the pipes in order to save money. This year, current Mayor Karen Weaver is continuing to mitigate the issue with lead in the water supply by replacing the lead-tainted service and steel lines. Federal Emergency Management Agency has been giving aid to the residents in form of water supplies, filters, water filter cartridges, and testing kits. President Barack Obama allocated $80 million to Michigan for federal drinking water construction aid and loans. The president stated, quote, "The bad news is that this should not have happened in the first place. And even though the scope of the response looks sort of like the efforts we're used to seeing after a natural disaster, that's not what this was. This was a man-made disaster. This was avoidable. This was preventable," end quote. President Obama was also adamant in encouraging Flint residents that the problem would get fixed, saying, quote, "Congress, led by your congressional delegation, needs to act in bipartisan fashion, do their job, and make sure Flint has the necessary resources," end quote.
On June 19th, the southern Mexican state of Oaxaca was the scene of a senseless massacre. The battle took place in a rural town of Nochixtlan and resulted in the death of at least 9 civilians. A week earlier, police crackdowns had begun in various regions of Oaxaca. These acts of violence are occurring in the light of current protests where teachers' movements have set up a peaceful protest in the city center and dozens of roadblocks across the state, including Nochixtlan. The teachers demanded negotiations with the local and federal government about a recently approved education overhaul and the implementation of neoliberal policies in Oaxaca. Now, the conflict first escalated when 2 of Oaxaca's major union leaders were accused of money laundering and were sent to a maximum security prison. According to truthout.org, initially the federal police force denied that they were carrying guns. However, as evidence mounted, they were forced to admit that they were in possession of weapons. In addition to 9 dead, the planned eviction on June 19th left over 100 people wounded, and between 20 to 25 disappeared after the confrontation that lasted 15 hours, during which police used tear gas and automatic machine guns to repress these fierce protesters. Hospital workers on the scene also attacked their tear gas. As of now, the barricades in Oaxaca city center remain as those in Nochixtlan and other rural areas.
Well, that does it for our summer edition of The Report. Until next time, I'm Evan Boydston.
I'm Sarah Fenton.
I'm Jeffrey Witten.
I'm Cassidy Jo Fortin.
And I'm Eric Resendiz. Stay fresh, Fullerton.